Let me start with the prior panel and presentations this morning and transition over to this panel this morning. And in the first panel today, we heard about barriers to entry, focusing on legal barriers. And you heard Terry and others challenge us here in Washington to step forward and do what we can to obtain federal preemption of state legal barriers to public broadband initiatives. And I want to support that and say we could not win today, no matter how hard we tried. But that's no reason not to get started. It takes usually several years for legislation to bake in Washington, federal legislation that is. And so we need to start the process, or to continue the process would be more accurate. And bear in mind that there are things in the works that could make it much more palatable, if not even necessary, for federal preemption legislation to happen in a couple of years. For example, we now have the Google Fiber project building out Kansas City, and Google's announced that it's going to not stop in Kansas City. We have the GigU initiative, and Gigabit Squared's very active in the space. You've heard about the US Ignite program. We've got multiple public projects already providing fiber-based gigabit services. We've got hundreds of last-mile fiber projects funded under the Rural Utility Service BIP program. And all of these things are generating attention on high-capacity networks that we didn't have just a few years before. And as these projects mature, develop new applications, develop a public sense of need for that kind of connectivity, and as we see more and more services gobbling up more and more bandwidth, communities that are left out or left behind are going to become increasingly vocal and increasingly restive, and then the chances of those things coming together to get us preemption will be all the more compelling. And our efforts at the state level, we hope, will also be more successful than they've been in just the last couple of years. Remember, some years ago we were successful, as Catherine was saying, year in and year out. It's just been this current turn of the screw that has made barriers all the more subject of attention, and we need to keep at it. We need to help. So I renew my request to everyone to help get involved, either at the state level, at the federal level, or both. But now let's transition over to this panel. Legal barriers are important, but they're only one of the challenges that some communities face. Some communities are not subject to legal barriers, and indeed some have the benefit of support from stimulus funding or other kinds of financial contributions to the success of their networks. And even under the best of circumstances, community broadband projects are very challenging, perhaps more challenging now than they've ever been, with the cable industry having increased the level of their capacity through DOCSIS 3.0, with wireless now offering 3G and 4G speeds. And it's not a matter of all or nothing. If you have a business plan based on take rates of a certain level, and you lose a certain percentage to the cable company and another percentage to the wireless providers, you can reach the point more quickly now than before where the business case will be very challenging. At the same time, we are learning more about how to use advanced communications network to support multiple purposes and obtain support from multiple sources of revenue. We have far to go in understanding how to do that well. We still have constraints at many levels. We still have a silo mentality in federal government and various agencies. We've got a lot to work on. But we have learned an enormous amount about fiber networks. We've got a number of models of very successful program. And in this panel, we're going to discuss with the members of our panel who have been personally involved in creating some of the best projects of their kind in the country, what they've learned, what they've accomplished, what lies ahead, and what benefits their experience can be to the rest of us. And I'm going to sit down, introduce them one at a time. I have studiously avoided prepping them for this, so they'll be fresh and perhaps surprised by the questions that I ask them. We will have no canned presentations. We'll go right into Q&A, and unlike some panels, I'm going to try to invite you to participate right from the outset, and I'll try to control it to a degree so we don't get too distracted, but feel free if you have a question that you feel is compelling to indicate that you want to ask it right away, and we'll see how we can do. So let me start with Scot Rourke on the far left, or my far left, your far right. Scot is the CEO of One Community based in Cleveland, Ohio, and One Community has been one of the most successful community-driven but not community-owned networks in the country, and formed one of the models that informed the BTOP program. Scot, can you tell us how you found your way to One Community? Many of us know Lev Gonick, the visionary who created One Cleveland, the very early predecessor of One Community. How did you find each other, and what was One Cleveland like when you got there?
Basically about 10 years ago, actually mostly right after the tech bust, Lev Gonick, the CIO of Case Western Reserve University, and we both came in to Cleveland from out of town, both from really Silicon Valley. And so at the time, we both were focused on as a community, how do we build our tech sector? The tech sector at the time in Cleveland was not as robust as we were accustomed to. I had lived in Chicago and in the Valley and done some really interesting internet boom things as an entrepreneur, and having received venture capital, sold the business, exited, and agreed to do economic development as we moved our family to Cleveland. And so really Lev and I were met with dozens and dozens of people over a period of about 2 years. I was doing business plans to do tech-based economic development about 10 years ago, and Lev had a lot of great ideas, and I tried to turn them into strategies, into business models, into business plans, and we kind of inventoried the assets of the region. We identified dark fiber as one of those assets being along the lake. We actually had an abundance of dark fiber without companies really operating anything in that area. So we quickly started attracting resources. We got dark fiber donated for economic development purposes from telecoms, from utilities. We got equipment donated from Cisco, and to fast forward about 10 years later now, we now have about 2,000 miles of fiber that we own and operate. We serve many thousands of institutions as a nonprofit. We serve primarily the public sector, and we really have a robust wholesale engine as well. So 4G providers and the likes. We've got a self-sustaining, very large regional community network that we own and operate that is, again, a nonprofit governed by the top public and private CEOs of the region on the governance. So it's we're doing 10 gig services. We have 100% market share in like healthcare. About 300 hospitals going, if you know Ohio, we go all the way from Toledo down to Columbus, down to Youngstown, about 5 million people in our market.
Drew Clark, many of us knew here in Washington for several years. Drew was a very prolific journalist. Then he created something called Broadband Census, focusing on data collection. Then he was the co-chair of the metrics subcommittee of our U.S. Broadband Coalition. Then he created Broadband Breakfast, and I believe is still involved in Broadband Breakfast, which is a group that meets and discusses topics of interest every month or so. And then he found an opportunity to move to Illinois, roll his sleeves up, and create a program designed to build broadband throughout the state of Illinois. And he's now the executive director of Broadband Illinois. Drew, tell us what your initial experience was like in coming to Illinois. How did you get Broadband Illinois up and running? We'll be back later to talk about some of the current and future life of Broadband Illinois, but let's focus for the time being on how you got there, what you found, and how you started the process of putting it together.
Thanks, Jim, and really appreciate your invitation to be on this panel at the last minute. It was here at Freedom to Connect 4 years ago. I'm not sure if Harold Feld is in the room right now, but he actually had a great line where he talked about how what the broadband stimulus program was showing is that broadband is not just about the providers. And we had kind of turned a point about 4 years ago where we began to see the needs of the users as a key part of the need for and initiative behind broadband. Thanks, Jim. So that's kind of by way of saying that what we see our role as the state broadband initiative entity in Illinois as being is about being the connector of the broadband providers and the broadband users. So when we have our meetings, backing up a second, we got our start, Broadband Illinois, through the state broadband initiative, which is part of the broadband stimulus funding. And it allocated $300 million across the country for state broadband initiative entities like Broadband Illinois to get started. We needed funds from our states, and we do have a governor, Pat Quinn, who's extremely enthusiastic about broadband and making sure that all of Illinois is connected. And so we see our mission and mandate as better broadband, better lives for everyone in the state of Illinois. So we have the start, the foundation is the mapping and planning that was called for in the Broadband American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. But we take that as the foundation for doing collaboration for deployment. We work in regions that we call E-teams. And so every one of 10 regions in the state of Illinois, when we have an E-team meeting, it's about getting the providers and the users of broadband together. It's about getting Frontier, AT&T, Joint Wireless together with the users, the community colleges, the libraries, the schools, the companies, the entrepreneurs that have a need for better broadband. And most recently, we've actually taken the next step towards funding programs that will stimulate the usage of the networks. And we just lay this all out in our annual report, which we've got outside here for you to pick up. But we talk about the Broadband Innovation Fund that we, through Small Business Administration funds, have tried to stimulate healthcare applications, agriculture applications, e-government applications, telemedicine, telecommuting. So, Jim, to get to your question, it's been an education. I've gone from sort of the journalism observer mode to the engaged activist collaboration mode, where we're trying to work with all parties, the neutral broker, to make sure that we promote projects like Mike Smeltzer's UC2B, but also the commercial providers, the WISPs, and the effort they're doing, and just leverage in whatever creative ways we can think of to get more people using the networks to take advantage of enhancing their lives with those networks.
Thank you, Drew. Our next panelist is Mike Smeltzer, who's with the University of Illinois. And Mike is the operating head of the UC2B project in Champaign and Urbana. Mike, how did you find your way to that project. And let me just say, from working with Mike, it is very rare to find someone who is as much a visionary and as detail-oriented as Mike has been. And the success of the project so far is attributable to a tremendous degree to your being able to put those two skills together as you have.
Well, thank you. Mary Beth, how am I doing on time? No, this is a long story, but I'll pick it up in the mid-90s. The very first web browser, Mosaic, was developed at the University of Illinois. The head of the National Center for Supercomputing, which Mosaic came out of, was a customer of my business. I had a digital color printing business, and one of our biggest challenges was how a graphic artist got a really large file that they'd created on their Macintosh at home and turned it into a poster-sized print or a proof for a cover of a book or whatever. And Larry Smarr was one of our customers, and he'd show up at 5 o'clock and with this big pile of zip disks or SyQuest disks, and he'd say, I got to go testify before Congress tomorrow. I need all these big charts. And I say, that's fine, Larry, but we're about to close. And he said, that's okay. I'll stay here and I'll help you guys. So, we saw more of Larry Smarr's staff for a period of time than his staff did. We saw more of Larry. And he said, we got this new thing. It's called Mosaic, and you guys ought to get involved. And so anyhow, my short story, my color printing company turned into an ISP overnight. And back in 1997, I went to the local city councils and I said, this internet thing's good, but you got to have fiber. This doesn't make sense unless we eventually get fiber. And I had these nice maps, and I called it CUNet 2000 because I thought it would only take 3 years to get it done. Well, here we are in 2013, 15 years later, and it's just about done. But it's been kind of a long road, and it kind of stopped and started along the way. But really, Joanne Hovis has got a lot to do with this because 4 years ago, I came out here for the State of the Net conference. And EDUCAUSE had put on a pre-conference for the State of the Net about what was going to happen with the stimulus package. President Obama hadn't quite been inaugurated yet, but everybody was looking forward to that. And I'm taking notes like crazy, and people are talking, and Joanne gave up and gave her spiel. And my third note was, heck with the taking notes, just hire her. So on the day that the broadband, or the stimulus package was signed by President Obama, Joanne was in our community getting people organized to how to take advantage of it. We had about 150, 200 people in the room looking forward to doing a broadband project. So we kind of hit the ground running, and that really made the big difference in terms of getting to where we are. That's the short version.
Okay, and we'll get into where we are today with UC2B and where it's heading in the future. Last to my immediate left is Greg Richardson, and we met several years ago at what I sometimes refer to as the Woodstock of wireless conference in Champaign, Urbana that Sasha Meinrath put on, and over the years have worked together on a number of projects. Greg was involved in many of the projects that were not quite accurately called municipal wireless projects because they were to be privately constructed, privately financed, privately owned in Philadelphia and Chicago and San Francisco and Riverside and various other places. And then more recently, he was the consultant as the head of Cividium, his firm, to a project put together by the North Georgia Network, which is a group of cooperatives in northeastern Georgia. And this project was the first project to be awarded a broadband stimulus grant. And Vice President Biden was there to deliver the award. Now Greg has moved to Rome, Georgia, one of the neatest communities that I've had the pleasure to be in recently. These are two different but very closely aligned stories, and I hope we'll be able to get into both of them, what makes both important for us. Greg, and how did you find your way to North Georgia Network and then Rome, and then we'll go back into more detail later.
Well, I guess I'll start from a about 3 or 4 years ago, our business became, as many consultants did in this industry, became started to be dominated by the stimulus activity. A lot of new investment. We were in the broadly defined community broadband market, and a lot of this money was going towards alternative providers, municipalities, electric co-ops, and competitive providers, and so on. So we were in the midst of doing a study for the communities up in northeastern Georgia that Jim mentioned. This was basically 5 counties that had banded together to try to do something about broadband infrastructure in northeast Georgia. And we were fortunate in timing, really very lucky in timing, that about the time we were completing a study that the state had sponsored to look at these issues, the stimulus program was announced. And we pursued a grant under, we had a lot of the planning already done. We had financials, we had an engineering plan. We had a pretty good narrative, which obviously in the grant world is pretty important, about why we wanted to do this and the team. And long story short, we were successful in being one of these first round 1 BTOP recipients. From that point, we had a lot of activity going on in Georgia at the time, and had some success over the next year and a half at securing what ended up being, I think, about $80 million in investment from both RUS and the NTIA. One of our projects in South Georgia is one of the first community broadband 4G LTE wireless systems, I think, that exist anywhere in the country, which was funded under RUS and is under construction now. And then the project that Jim mentioned, I moved, in the process of all this, I moved to a little town called Rome, Georgia, in northwest Georgia. And I did something I'd never done before. I'd been in this community broadband thing for a decade or so, and I decided to put my hands on and become a participant in a community broadband project, as opposed to just an advisor, somewhat from the outside. So that's been a blast for me. We've done a lot of neat things over the past couple of years that have allowed me to take a very personal view of the industry that I consult in.
Thank you. Now let me go back to you, Scott. As I mentioned before, the One Community Project was an important model for the Connected Community Infrastructure program under BTOP. And the basic philosophy of that program is that it would support the creation of middle-mile projects, emphasizing connecting up community anchor institutions as a way of driving fiber more deeply into communities. Now, One Community was doing that without subsidies, without support for these activities through stimulus funds or any other kinds of funds. How did you manage to do that on your own for the 7 or 8 years that you'd been doing it by the time the BTOP program was created?
Yes, we've been very lucky. I think we've always had great entrepreneurial talent on our team, largely private sector talent. We've been very resourceful. We always had a development office as well, so we had in Northeast Ohio, we have terrific philanthropy. So we've had multiple streams of opportunities, grants, earned income. When we started 10 years ago, we had out of the gates the university at Case with Lev as our first customer. So we really started with a lot of donated time, donated resources. It was kind of the it takes a village mentality. So we started with getting programmatic people and working a lot on making a bigger pie. And that at a social level, meaning that we didn't talk about broadband per se. We talked about what it could do. We were very intent on demonstrating social benefits to everybody. So we were able to get corporate support, philanthropic support. We continued to do kind of like consulting, save people money, business cases. We attracted a lot of investment. We build networks for counties. And so really, we've been very resourceful in the public and private earned and what they call contributed income streams, new market tax credits, which many of you may know for real estate. We were the first in the country to apply and actually get our data center and a regional fiber ring funded as if it were real estate, which was very novel. And The first time was very difficult, but I encourage you all to explore that opportunity. So really, it was more the entrepreneurial, or what I call a social entrepreneurial approach, which is we always thought about scale and sustainability, how to articulate a business case, get people bought in to our shared vision, and then we'd figure out the resources to go do it.
Drew, if you were to take a look from top down on Illinois in terms of both the deployment of advanced networks and the adoption and use of advanced networks, what do you see happening there right now, and what role are you playing in pushing it forward?
So from the top down, there's really three developments going on. I mean, the first is the broadband stimulus investments we've been speaking about. Mike Smeltzer's doing one of those investments in the state, but there's 4 other very major fiber builds going on in the South, Clearwave, in the southern 20 counties, the Illinois Century Network in 55 counties throughout the East Central all the way up to Chicago. And then in the north, there's the DeKalb fiber project and the iFiber project. So most of the state received funding for significant broadband investments that are bringing new capacity online now in middle mile connectivity. The second piece, and this is something that is unique to Illinois because of Governor Quinn, and in some ways inspired by the gigabit challenge that Google put forward that led to Kansas City receiving that. Governor Quinn in the State of the State last year put forward the Gigabit Communities Challenge, and for any community or provider that wanted to come forward with a proposal to build at least 1,000 connections to end users for gigabit level connectivity, they were eligible to receive up to $1 million in funds. $6 million was available overall, and $4 million of that has been announced thus far, and there's more to come in the near future on that. So those developments in the south side of Chicago, Gigabit Squared is partnering with University of Chicago. There's a kind of a GigU tie-in, I believe, that's been mentioned here today. There's also announcements for Evanston, Illinois, with Northwestern, and Aurora, a community slightly west of Chicago. So that's kind of a second development going on, the Gigabit Challenge. And the third is simply, greater investment by providers as we track broadband broadband availability every 6 months as part of our mapping responsibilities. We show more and more green areas, more and more faster speeds available because of increased investment by the AT&Ts, by Frontier. So we're trying to be able to be as helpful as we can to take that information into the hands of, the small WISPs or the small last mile carriers, or to the libraries, the colleges, community colleges that need to access, that need help, and just knowing how to navigate the connections and the landscape they've got. So it's a lot of hand-holding. We consider ourselves problem solvers from the perspective of broadband deployment. And, I'll talk a little more if you are interested about some of the programs aimed at adoption usage that we're trying to promote as well.
We'll be back. We'll be back to that. Now, Mike, could you describe UC2B in a bit more detail than before? UC2B is unique in the sense that it is providing both middle mile and last mile services. Go ahead.
We're fairly greedy. I think we're the only project that NTIA funded that really just concentrated on a fairly small area. Like Drew said, the other BTOP projects in Illinois are 19 counties or 55 counties. We're 2 communities and roughly 50 square miles. One of the things we did was we expanded NTIA's definition of what is an anchor institution. I think most communities said, well, if you're a junior college or a major medical facility, that's an anchor institution. We did all those, and we did public safety and all the kind of normal things, but we also did the homeless shelters, the Boys and Girls Club, the YMCA, the food bank, and a lot of social service agencies that were anchors of our community. We kind of just interpreted it that way. So in that 50 square mile area, we now have more than 260 anchor institutions, whereas some of the projects that may be doing hundreds of square miles have 80 anchor institutions. So ours are much closer to each other. So half of our project financially ended up being rings to hook up all those anchor institutions, and the other half ended up being 11 census block groups that qualified as being underserved with broadband by virtue that when we did a door-to-door survey, less than 41% of the people living there had a broadband connection back in 2009. And that was one of NTIA's requirements for doing that. So we're building a gigabit network that looks the same to an anchor institution as it does to somebody in a home or a business in those areas. It's all the same equipment, it's all the same everything. It's just in the fiber to the home areas we have cabinets to concentrate it, and for the people that are kind of out there all by themselves, we bring those back to a central location.
Now, Greg, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to ask you first about NGN, and then I'm going to reverse the order and start with you again to talk about Rome and work the other way, okay? NGN is a project of cooperatives, electric cooperatives, who are cousins, or at the very least, strong kindred spirits of publicly owned networks. What is it about the characteristics of that group up in Northeast Georgia that has made this project as successful as it has been to date?
Well, I think when we were starting the NGN project, it was mostly economic development authorities in counties who were saying, we want to be able to do recruiting and get companies to move here, and we don't have the infrastructure to do it that they're asking for. So we went and, as I mentioned, we did the study, and we said, oh, sure, you need more to recruit and so on. And at that point, we sort of stopped in our tracks, and what we lacked was an operating partner because these development authorities were not equipped they didn't have the billing systems and the technical knowledge and the infrastructure and the truck rolls, and they really weren't prepared for what they wanted to be or to do. So we found the co-ops, and I guess, Jim, to answer your question directly, the electric cooperatives, they provide electricity throughout the U.S. over, I believe, 75 to 80% of the land area in the country. So they're this enormous force. They've been around for 80 plus years as part of the electrification of the country. They were instrumental. They had this history of solving the most difficult problem, technically and economically, that we face today in broadband, which was high cost of service areas. How do you make the economics work? How do you, even if you can get the capital and it's, let's say, subsidized or paid for in some other way, how do you sustain it? And so they had this history of being able to solve that problem. I would say, though, most importantly, they were member-owned. They had this culture of being conscious of the community. They were socially conscious. It was in their DNA. You go and see a Little League baseball game, and the name of the EMC, the electric co-op, was on the uniforms of the kids. That this was just the way it had always been. So all those things, I think what I did, I've been working in this industry for a decade or so around this time, and I remember just sitting there going, where have these folks been? Why did I not, figure out before what potentially great partners they were in this area? And but Jim, to your question, those are some of the things I think that we found were really valuable and made it work for NGN.
Okay, so now let's switch to Rome. As those of us who've been involved in the field know, building the network is a heck of a good start, but in and of itself, it's not enough. We need to work on multiple disciplines to use the network successfully, to get excited about it, to work with it, to use it as a resource of the community. And it seems that Rome embodies all of that. Now, it's not going to build its own fiber network, but it's going to get one. So how is all that working out in Rome, and what's your role in it?
Well, we played a similar role. The difference with Rome is that the recipient of the BTOP award, the applicant and the recipient, is a private, for-profit competitive provider. It was a CLEC that had been building essentially middle-mile fiber networks within the community and surrounding Rome for a number of years. They were successful in securing, it was about a $21 million grant on a $26 million budget, and as I said, they were a private for-profit. So it was a little bit different, and we had some different dynamics to deal with there. We dealt with those things by creating a form of public-private partnership, or I wouldn't describe it as partnership. I would just describe it as mechanisms to ensure accountability for the community. And so, for example, in order to write a check from this entity is called AVFN. It's at the Appalachian Valley Fiber Network. in order to write a check to a vendor to build this network or to do anything from the grant, AVFN has to have a signature from our Northwest Georgia Regional Commission, which is essentially a regional 12-county economic development agency, which represents the public interest around the issue of recruiting and economic development. And that's just one example. There were a number of others that these checks and balances were put in place to ensure that this for-profit operator was conscious of the community issues. I guess the other thing I'd say about Rome is my personal involvement. I get bored really easy, and I had done a lot of these projects, and just coming out of NGN, and something to me about going and just quote building another fiber network and all that wasn't enough, and it was in my hometown now, so I'd moved there. So I got involved with a number of people. In fact, a couple of the folks are here today from that group, and started imagining what can we do on top of this network? What can we do once this capacity exists? We've got broadband abundance, not scarcity. We've got a gigabit connected zone in downtown. We launched something called a makerspace or a hackerspace, if any of you are familiar with that, which is a gathering place for creative people to get together. And not to overstep my time here, but we started layering on a lot of different initiatives. Jim was kind enough to come down and speak at a conference we held on innovation recently, and that conference we were able to attract speakers like Jim and others from around the country, and that brought a lot of attention to the community. So the net of that whole story is that in Rome, I think the profile for the project is successful example of private investment that worked in terms of it being community-minded, and second, successful example of being able to drive innovation, not just social welfare and digital equity and all those things which are important, not just recruiting and economic development, but we really started to drive innovation in the community, which doesn't frankly get talked about as much in community broadband.
Trish, are you out there? Yeah, please meet Trish, who's way up at the top there, who started that process of the conference called Confluence, and has lots of creative thoughts. Meet her during the breaks if you can. Okay, Mike, what kind of reaction to UC2B are you getting from the business community, from potential customers in the underserved areas that you're planning to provide service in, from existing carriers? What's the impact of UC2B in Champaign and Urbana?
It's still kind of ramping up. We have roughly 900 sites connected right now. The people that are in those areas, I was hopeful that we could sign up as many as 2,500 homes. There's roughly 4,800 homes in that area. And at this point, we'll probably end up with about 1,200, so that's about half of what, but that's 25% in basically 1 year. Most municipal broadband projects, maybe get to 45% penetration after 5 years, so I'm pretty happy with 25% after 1 year. It's not what we wanted, but it's still relatively large. The question we get asked the most often is, well, what about the other 90% of the community that doesn't have fiber to the home? When you come into my house, when you come into my business, how can we make this happen? Can I give you some money under the table or whatever? I don't have that kind of power. And so last year, we've participated in the GigU initiative since it started. And I think in some ways our project was a little bit of a prototype for what Blair put together for GigU. And we were one of the applicants for Gigabit Squared, and we're now actually talking with Gigabit Squared. We made their cut, and we'll see what that turns into. We also did our own RFI to see what other providers would be interested in working with us. And so we're going to have this funny 4 to 5 way dating process for a little while, and hopefully we'll winnow it down and end up with a monogamous relationship that will bear fruit as we go forward. AT&T in the early days was not overly thrilled. Drew's smiling because I gave some perhaps not well thought through testimony before a legislative commission where I said some mean things about AT&T, and they didn't take it well. They actually came over and visited the university president and thought that maybe I should be fired. So I'm still here. So actually the university president got fired, so maybe there's some wisdom in that, but it had nothing to do with that. I'm still here and he's gone. But generally, the community's been receptive. We had one private partner. It's probably one of the reasons we were funded is we had one private partner that was putting money into our local matching funds, a local ISP that's also a CLEC, and they've been very aggressive in terms of selling the network. They bought fiber on all of our rings. All of our financing, to the extent that we had a secret sauce, it was through IRUs. We pre-sold IRUs to the cities. We pre-sold IRUs to the university, to this private firm, to the mass transit district. That's how we raised our matching funds, is each of these organizations ended up with some strands of fiber that they were going to control for the next 20 years, and that was valuable to them. But they've been out marketing, and people are excited by that. So it's generally been well received. Some of the local ISPs are a little nervous because they're not sure what this means for them. Our rates are significantly lower, but right now we're just providing services in very low-income areas where they didn't have much penetration anyway.
Okay, Drew, you said earlier that one of your significant activities is to try to build bridges between the public and private sectors in this. How's that going, and what are the issues that you're addressing, and if they've been resolved, how have they been resolved?
Well, that public-private sector prism can be viewed at two ways. I mean, one is sort of the conflict that we often see between the commercial providers like, an AT&T or a Comcast and these BTOP recipients. And so that's been a tension, but I think that there's a light at the end of the tunnel, as Mike laid out there, the deepening opportunities that exist once these networks become live for commercial providers to either, be partners of a UC2B or a Clearwave or a Illinois Century network, but also to use the networks to begin to use the bulk capacity and become a last mile provider, reselling the high capacity that's flowing over the middle mile network. So that's one dimension, if you would, of public-private. I mean, another dimension is really there are public sector entities like the state universities, the community colleges, the libraries that have a need for connectivity. They have a need for higher broadband capabilities. And this is starting to take us in a new dimension of how can we get broadband to the most the low income and the rural areas of the state, and the Connect America Fund and the sort of series of uncertainties that still exist around how that's getting changed and how funding decisions are going to be made. But I'm very excited by the new models that have been generated from the Illinois applicants as well as others. I love Jim Salter's talk today about the electric co-ops, electric utilities, and the role they can play. We've actually started to have some good traction with the Illinois Electric Association, because they are very active in Illinois, and they want broadband, and they don't want to go out and do broadband. They just want it there because they want their communities to be strengthened and blessed by what they can have with broadband. So I hope I'm addressing your question a little bit, Jim. But in terms of bridging public-private divides, we really want to see it happen, whether it's through public or private connections, public or private institutions.
Okay. Scott, I'd like to ask you two questions. And again, I invite members of the audience to ask questions on any of these topics if you'd like greater detail. But I want to ask you two questions in case we don't get back to them, okay? Number one, one community is unique in discovering early on the benefits of both creating supply and creating demand, and creating demand through education of customers. So I'd like you to talk a little bit about that, and also about creating supply and what happens when you reach a certain size and then can have more clout about determining where supply is going to be provided and from whom. The second thing is that one community is not for profit. It is not owned by communities, and yet one community touts itself as being community driven. Would you elaborate on what that means and take it away on those two questions?
Sure. Well, again, our vision always was how do we transform the region using technology broadly, and we happened to start with fiber just because we thought that that infrastructure was crucial to get to the and even serve as a platform of the application layer. So with that vision, we went through and always engaged the community. Our board has always been the top public and private sector leaders. Initially, it was very public sector focused. And as we continued to go down the pipeline and get in deep into the programs, it was really important to have the private sector leaders there. We also wanted the progress that we didn't necessarily see in the public sector. So it was great having the largest employer there saying, oh, you know, Mr. City, you said you were going to do this to help this program. And the accountability went up and the speed went up. The investment of time and other resources went up. So it was really important to have kind of a checks and balance of the public-private sector at the table at the same time, help pick priorities, aligning to the regional economic development strategies, aligning the big public sector entities planning exercises into our visions and our assets. So more concretely, what we did is in healthcare, which is one of the strengths of our region, we provided resources, we raised resources, grants, philanthropy, and the likes to accelerate our regional collaborations in healthcare. So we did, if you know what a regional health information organization is, we were spending a couple $100,000 a year to convene and develop plans and attract millions of dollars of resources to help our healthcare institutions, which turned into our best customers, and really the key to our sustainability model. In education, where they didn't have necessarily the financial resources, and in some cases the talent that we needed, we actually did a national search, hired, and we're the chief information officer of the schools that we fund, and they spend half the time with us working on regional strategies and half the time on site transforming school technology amongst more than 100 schools. And so really the key's been helping us, really the one key aside from the infrastructure is having dedicated capacity with 100% discretion on what we do, and we've dedicated it towards positive change. So dedicated capacity to change management really has been the number one key in that helps us get the articulation right, which is really important, do the business cases, be a trusted resource. We're always there. We're not overwrought with things to do. We know what our priorities are because we've aligned them all. And again, to your other point, our governance being all the top leaders has really helped on making sure that we were doing our jobs and vice versa. So it is community owned and that there is no equity. The board governs it. I serve at the discretion of the board, even though I'm the founder, original founder along with Lev. And so that's really, we are part of the fabric. When we've done our battles with, potentially certain phone companies, we've always presided over evil per se because we were so tied in the community. The backlash was tremendous. So we've not been bothered, and in fact continue to partner, make a bigger pie with them, and we both do more than $1 million each, both directions, the phone and the cable company, looking at it as a regional system with regional assets. So did I get both questions?
You did, but I'm going to jump around now, and I want to follow up on a point that you made just this minute ago. The benefits to the private sector. Now, you were telling me earlier that you calculated the cost that one community has incurred in training people to be digitally literate, to provide them computer skills, to educate them as to how to use the internet. And two questions there, too. Number one, what impact has that had on the families that have gone through your program? And number two, what impact has that had on the private providers of communication services?
What he's referring to is we, as part of the BTOP Awards, we were one of the larger sustainable broadband adoption grants, about $18 million of resources over 3 years to train households. To date, we've trained about 35,000 households how to use the internet. They were low income. We've got a great study coming out. It's in draft form right now, but in coming weeks, Mossberger, who many of you know, actually, I know they've done a lot of work for Illinois. We've got a study coming out. We've done the evaluation of this program. But after 3 years, we've trained 35,000 households. More than 2/3 of them are new and sustainable broadband subscribers. And for the first time, our revenue and actually our profits that go to local phone and cable companies that serve this audience is a new audience for them, exceeds the cost of the program. So more explicitly, our budget is about $6 million to do this training, and now our revenue and our forecast profit for the phone and cable companies that are just catching these guys. We've trained them how to use the internet. We've shown them how to access health information. We've shown them how to do electronic medical records for our hospitals. We've shown them how to get jobs on the internet, and now they're using it, they're subscribing it, and we've taken some of the risk out of it, which I'll talk about in just a second. But again, that's a self-sustaining program. Now, when you look at it from profit to providers, is higher than the cost of the training. So we think there's an opportunity. We're trying to do a business case for some kind of public and private investment to better support digital literacy like you see in many other countries in the United States. As it relates to our role, again, we trained them, we helped them get computers. One of the big barriers we saw was actually the upfront capital, and they had bad credit and the like. So in many cases, we're the fiscal agent with Clearwire. If you've heard of Mobile Citizen, we're actually helping take the financial risk. We're prepaying it. It's almost like a prepaid phone. We're just doing it for internet connections. And so the prepaid program that we've done has really helped surmount a lot of the problems we've had getting the conventional private sector providers to come and hit this demographic that they were terrified about and make it attractive to them, sustainable to them, and again, now their profits exceed the cost of the program.
Okay, now, I think that all of you would recognize that of critical importance to everyone in this community here is that we and our colleagues in our communities and our businesses have an opportunity to participate in the decisions that are being made about our critical infrastructure and the services that we provide. In Scot's case, he's talked about how one community became a community-driven organization, even though it wasn't publicly owned. For any of the rest of you or all of the rest of you, how do your programs enhance local choice and individual opportunity to participate? Drew, you look like you want to jump on that.
I wanted to jump on a thread that I guess I'm seeing some discussion on the back channel here. Are these all about BTOP projects? Well, yes and no. I mean, you know, Scot was funded, but you were in business for many years before, and I think that, you know, you would probably say that the broadband stimulus gave you the critical mass, but you want to leverage that and go forward. In the case of Broadband Illinois, you know, we're funded under this, but we're seeking to be a continual voice for better broadband and better lives. Jim, I don't have a direct answer to your question, you know, in terms of direct community engagement.
It could be governance of the organizations. It could be Pat Quinn's leadership, the convergence of so many local leaders involved in the process,
Yeah.
you know, any of them.
Well, what I would just say is that we need to make sure that there's education going on both at the low level, the non-users of broadband, but also on the high level, that is to say, why gigabit level connectivity is useful, how it can be used, what you can benefit from that. And that's going to build communities of interest, no matter the governance structures that we have for organizations.
Mike, you want to?
We are an intergovernmental consortium right now. It's the two cities and the university. There's some strengths in that. We have a policy committee that's appointed by the CIOs or CEOs of each of those organizations. We're actually in the process of transitioning or looking to transition, really following the one community model to a nonprofit corporation. As we look to attract private investment to expand our system, we don't think there's going to be another BTOP 3 or BTOP 2 program. We need to be able to have confidential conversations with people. Mm-hmm. And as a public entity right now, we're part of the Freedom of Information Act. We have an Open Meetings Act in Illinois that's very aggressive. It's not conducive to having private conversations when you need to have private conversations. We're competing with Comcast. We're competing with AT&T, which are two of the most aggressive and some might say ruthless marketing companies that are out there. And if we have to lay our entire marketing plan for the next 6 months out in a public meeting every time, that's not going to be a successful strategy. So we're actually taking a step back. In this private corporation, it's envisioned, and this is up for debate and discussion this next week, that the same people will still appoint the board of directors. So it'll still be the cities and the university controlling who's on the board, but it will be a separate entity that won't be beholden to any of those entities as well.
Okay, so we have about 5 minutes left, and so I'm going to start with Greg and move down this way. What's ahead for each of you? What would you like to see happen, and what has to happen in order for your vision to unfold the way that you want it to? Greg?
Well, I would say two things are on our minds. One is that I would make a pitch that we have to do away with this concept of even using the word enough, meaning how much bandwidth is enough. We allow ourselves to get roped into these debates. The Georgia bill right now that was talked about a lot this morning is this bill that we thought was dead in subcommittee last week. And it, as many of you know, it said, among other things, it said if a community has a 1.5 megabit service available, then it can't, community can't get involved in broadband. Well, the subcommittee bill that got passed, surprisingly, was changed slightly to say 3 megabits instead of 1.5. So in someone's mind, I hate to admit, in our legislator's mind, was this decision that said, okay, fine, you community people, you got me, Georgia Municipal, and all the groups, you got me, 1.5, you're right, that wasn't enough, 3 meg, though, that's enough. And I think we've got to move to a place where we say, look, innovation doesn't happen by defining a goal of 10 years where we want to be and building blocks on top of blocks. It doesn't happen that way. Sometimes it happens by removing every barrier you can and giving some kind of an asset that is abundant and seeing what people will do with it. And I think that's a really, really key issue that we need to move towards. The second one is, Darcy said this morning that, in the age we live in, power comes from network. It doesn't come from hierarchy. And I think that's the other great challenge that we have now is to figure out, Jim, to your question, to figure out these new, how will the social era and this connectedness that we have in terms of social networks and relationships, how will that transform into the power structures and the business models that we have with local government, with community broadband networks, with service provider businesses, and so on. So those are two of the big things that are on our mind.
Okay, Mike, then Drew, then Scott, 1 minute each, and we'll be right on.
Have 1 minute each word. Right, faster than that. 1 second, one sentence each.
We need to make hay in Illinois while we still have probably the most proactive broadband governor in the country.
There are 56 state and territory organizations focused on broadband mapping and planning. Let's build these into a coalition to ensure better broadband and better lives by making sure that the public component is considered as part of broadband.
I think that the folks in the room could help contribute to a vision of what success looks like, whether it's an Asian city with sensors and the likes, but we need another Sputnik moment where they can see where this is leading and what the cost of not doing it is.
Join me in thanking this panel of visionaries and successful leaders.
And thanks to you, Jim, for a very interesting panel.